Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for April 19th, 2022. What I'm going to be reporting today is that we're coming very, very close to crossing red lines in Ukraine. That is, NATO, US, UK forces are pushing for a continuing war, and in doing so are risking the danger of a much broader confrontation with Russia, which could include fighting in Europe and even US-Russian confrontation. Now, it's becoming clearer by the day what EU Foreign Policy Commission member Josep Borrell meant when he said there's no solution but a military solution. He said that that's the only possibility for ending this war. In other words, no negotiated settlement, no negotiations. He means a military defeat of Russia. Now let's look at the latest developments to see how diluted this conception is and how dangerous it is. Let's start with a report from a senior correspondent from the leading French newspaper, Le Figaro, named Georges Malbrunot, who spoke to French Channel C News, which is the second most watched television news station in France. And what he said, coming back from Ukraine, from the front lines, he said that what he saw, quote, with my own eyes, was that Americans are in charge of military operations in Ukraine, unquote. He said he noted the presence of British SAS and Delta forces in the region. And there are others who have made that report as well. Both the British government and the Pentagon deny it. But there's more than Malbrunot saying that that's the case. Secondly, U.S. Senator Chris Coons, who's a Democrat from Delaware, who's very close to Joe Biden, said over the weekend that there should be U.S. troop deployments in Ukraine. Now, what's he been smoking? The idea of sending U.S. troops in there to fight the Russians? You're now talking Hillary Clinton-style insanity, as when she called for a no-fly zone over Syria during the 2016 campaign. We have the testimony from former Italian Air Force commander who said that Biden, Boris Johnson, and Stoltenberg have no intention to negotiate. Their goal is a military defeat of the Russian army and an economic collapse in Russia. We also have testimony from a former Swiss intelligence official named Jacques Baude, who told Aaron Mate of Pushback that the war actually began a week earlier than the time the first Russians crossed into Ukraine on February 24th. He said that on February 16th and 17th, there was a 30-fold increase in shelling by the Ukrainian army into the Donbass. He said this was noted by OSCE observers who were quickly shuttled out of the area before they could report that. And this was a week before the Russians moved in. This shelling, according to Bo, convinced Putin that there was no possibility for a settlement, a negotiated settlement, for the security guarantees that Putin had demanded from Biden in their meeting in December. Now then you have the whole narrative that the Russian military is retreating in defeat. The army's in disarray, their supply lines are broken, their tanks are breaking down, and they're murdering and looting on their way out of the country. Now, let's take a different view that's coming from ex-Marines such as Scott Ritter, the weapons investigator and whistleblower, former Colonel Larry Johnson, a CIA veteran and ex-State Department counterterror operative. Johnson asks the question, where are the photos of destroyed Russian tanks? Where are the photos of fields littered with Russian armaments that have been destroyed? If this were true, that this narrative were true, where are the photos? Where's the evidence? You also have Lieutenant Colonel Douglas McGregor, who worked for a period of time at the end of the Trump administration as an advisor to the acting Defense Secretary Miller. And McGregor said the Russians never intended to capture Kiev. This was bunk. The so-called Russian playbook that was being reported by Rachel Maddow, by CNN, by the Washington Post, and others was not based on anything that Putin or his generals said. And their goals have largely been accomplished, according to McGregor. The demilitarization of Ukraine, well, that's been largely accomplished. So why is NATO continuing to pour in arms? A second question, the denazification. Well, that's underway. Why does the West continue to deny the presence of Nazi militia inside the Ukrainian Defense Forces? There was an intercept that was reported by the Russians of communications from Mariupol, in which it was said that the orders were coming from Kiev to the Azov regiment that was holed up in the steel mill that was under attack by the Russians. They were told to shoot Ukrainian soldiers who want to surrender. I can't confirm that, but that fits in with the line that the Azov battalion is going to fight to the last man. Now, then you also have the third objective that Putin outlined, according to McGregor, which is security for Donbass. And that's now why the Russian troops are moving into eastern Ukraine to finish the demilitarization of the Ukrainian military and the denazification. And this is for what purpose? To guarantee the security of the ethnic Russian population of the Donbass, who are the targets of shelling by the Ukrainian army. And over 14,000 residents in that area, mostly civilians, have been killed by the Ukrainian army in the last 8 years. And then we have the story of the collapse of the Russian economy. Well, the ruble has recovered its pre-war value. And as Dmitry Medvedev said, it's actually the West that's collapsing. All you have to do is look at the effects of the inflation, the supply shortages, and so on. And you see that it's the West which is on the defensive. And more importantly, we're seeing the emergence of a potential new financial system to protect most of the world from the decline of the City of London Wall Street system. So if you still buy the narrative, the idea that Putin is the evil one, that it's the Russians who are responsible for this, that the Russians are being destroyed, and that we have to keep supporting the heroic people of Ukraine, who are the victims of this US, NATO, UK drive, pause and think for a minute. Can you now believe a line that's pushed by the same people who told you it's a, quote, slam dunk, unquote, that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction, which were never found? Can you believe the people who said there were chemical weapons used by the Syrian government, when in fact it turns out that it was the so-called moderate rebels who were really Islamic terrorists who were the ones using chemical weapons? The same people who told you that the coup in Kiev in 2014 was a democratic move that was for the improvement of the living conditions of Ukrainians, when since that coup took place, the living conditions of most Ukrainians have collapsed further? And can you still believe the same people who told you that Donald Trump was elected through the machinations of Vladimir Putin, and that the Russiagate story was true, even with all the evidence that's come out to prove that it's false? You still believe those people? And now we have the obscenity of Senator Lindsey Graham, the neocon buddy of the late Senator John McCain. Remember, the two of them went to Syria, and McCain was actually photographed posing with ISIS commanders who he thought were moderate rebels. There's also video of Graham and McCain in Ukraine meeting with Azov regiment figures, the neo-Nazi figures, pledging to give them anything that they need to win the war against Russia. Now McCain is in a delegation in Taiwan preparing a Pacific Ukraine against China. The real issue here is the collapse of the unipolar post-Cold War order. If you support war against Russia or China, you're on the side of the City of London and Wall Street. You're on the side of BlackRock and Jamie Dimon, of Klaus Schwab and Mark Carney, Bezos and Prince Charles. Their Roman Empire is collapsing, and they're willing to go to war, a destructive war that risks the survival of the human race to protect their private special interests. But there's a new architecture which is potentially coming into being, based on development is the name of peace, and cooperation and diplomacy, rather than war, is what's necessary. Now is the time to decide to join us. We're at a crucial moment. This is not about Russia winning a war and the US losing a war. It's about sanity prevailing, and we need more voices of sanity. We have to end the flow of arms into Ukraine. We have to end the economic warfare and negotiate in good faith for a new strategic and financial architecture that serves the interests of all people in all sovereign nations, not just the interests of the few billionaires and the puppets that they control. Thanks for joining me today. Tune in again tomorrow and share this video. This is a crucial moment in the history of mankind.